Welcome to Around the Empire. This is a Swapcast with the Conflicts of Interest podcast, and its host Kyle Anzalone, and I'm the host of the Around the Empire podcast, Joanne. Today, Kyle and I compare the Biden foreign policy to the Trump, Obama, and Bush administrations. We analyze a press conference and announcements from NATO's Jens Stoltenberg about expanding the number of troops and the area of operation in Iraq, and freezing any withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, and more. We recorded this on February 18th, 2021.
Hey Joanne, how's it going?
Hey Kyle, how you doing?
Well, I'm hanging in there, at least better than some other people in the country right now. The way it's portrayed in the mainstream media, you would think it was Armageddon in Texas right now.
It sure looks that way, but I'm not there, so I don't know.
Right. I mean, I'm seeing people on Twitter, compare it to a third world country and everything, and the same war zones and stuff like that. But we're going to talk about the actual war zones today. Of course, we got the important stuff on our shows here. One of the things that we want to start off with in general, talking about like what's going to happen with Biden's foreign policy, is looking at what's going on with NATO. And so, Joanne, you put this presser together. Do you want to give a little introduction to who's speaking, what it is, what we're going to hear here?
Well, the title of the meeting is NATO 2030, but it was a meeting of the ministers of defense, in our case, defense secretary. And this presser was entirely on Afghanistan and Iraq. And it's a return to the Obama. It's a Groundhog Day thing. And I thought it was particularly interesting because of how uncomfortable Stoltenberg was as I was saying to Kyle earlier, he's always a little weird, a little jerky in his movements and things. But the guy, he's very uncomfortable with the message that he's giving today. And that's because it's a really bad message.
Yeah. One of the things I want to emphasize before we listen to this clip, Joanne, is just how important the NATO and Western troops are in this situation. For the Taliban, the agreement was that Western troops would leave. And for the discussion that I've really had on the show, it's always been when U.S. forces will leave, because I think we assume that if the U.S. leaves, NATO will go with it. But on the other hand, I think there's also a possibility that we end up, if NATO stays, we have to stay forever because they're our NATO allies. So should we get into his comments here on Afghanistan? And just note that it wasn't us who have this tech problem, but whoever was doing the audio had some kind of tech problem. So like the first minute or so, his real introduction of this speech is kind of junk audio. It like overplays on itself. So we're starting off a little bit like over a minute into this, and we'll hear some of his comments here on Afghanistan.
Taliban must negotiate in good faith, reduce the high level of violence, and live up to their commitment to stop cooperating with international terrorist groups. NATO's goal is to ensure that Afghanistan never again becomes a safe haven for terrorists that would attack our homelands. So allies will continue to assess together the conditions on the ground. As we do, the protection of our troops remains paramount, and we will take all necessary measures to keep them safe.
So, Joanne, I thought that was maybe a good place to start our conversation, because he's saying that we have to keep troops in Afghanistan and then we have to do everything possible to keep them safe. When I think it's pretty clear from the situation that's developing on the ground in Afghanistan, the Trump administration negotiated a May 1st deadline in Afghanistan with this peace agreement. And while the peace agreement hasn't created peace in Afghanistan from the very beginning, I said that's kind of a bad name, a bad thing to call it a peace agreement, because it's not going to create peace in Afghanistan. However, it has kind of somewhat created peace between the U.S. and the Taliban. The U.S. has continued airstrikes against the Taliban, but the Taliban have not killed an American in over a year now. So, yeah, I have this article here from Stars and Stripes right here. U.S. goes 1 year without a combat death in Afghanistan as Taliban warn against reneging on the peace deal. And so, what we've heard from the Taliban, Joanne, is that they're going to launch an offensive. And I think I have an article here from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com saying that the Taliban could launch a major offensive against the U.S. if Biden stays in Afghanistan. And so, does Stoltenberg not think through it here? What do you think's going on with this, Joanne?
He's just lying. And it's funny because there are some parallels with the situation in Iraq, too, because he keeps saying, and he's very nervous when he's saying, "Oh, well, we're doing all of this in coordination with the authorities in Iraq, but going to increase the number of troops in Iraq." And we know, and people who listen to my podcast know from my many interviews with Elijah Magne, that the Iraqi parliament voted and said American troops have to leave. And the militias, Iran-aligned militias, but not necessarily Iran-backed. Some of them are Iraqi militias, just straight up. But they had some. They held back for a while because they were waiting for some negotiated deadlines and things like that. It's been some time now that they've started attacking again, but they also held back for a while and didn't shoot any missiles at our bases, or I don't even know what the other things that I'm sure there are a number, if they're on their home ground, there are a number of things they can do to make it very uncomfortable for our troops.
Right, but you highlight there the rocket attacks were a major one that didn't happen for quite a long period of time until the U.S. not a American who was a contractor, but somebody the U.S. employed in Iraq was killed this week by a rocket attack.
Well, there was a deadline. I don't recall the exact date, but it's in some of Elijah's articles where they were saying, do what you said you're going to do. We'll give you till the date you said you were going to do it, and if you don't, then we're going to start agitating again. And the situation is very similar in Afghanistan. Both of them want the troops to be pulled out. There were talks and agreements about pulling out troops, and Biden has now. Trump didn't follow through on some of the things that he said he would do, whether that was him as a person or him caving to the kind of pressure that clearly was there. You can see it right now because they're reversing everything now that he's out of office. But we're in the same situation again, and Biden is just doing a reset, and you could see that they're very nervous about the safety of the troops that are there because they're reneging on deals.
Right.
Which puts our troops, and they don't know, but they don't ever want to admit that it's their own fault, that they are consciously making a decision that will further endanger our troops, like a lot, not just a little, a lot.
Yeah. No, I think that the Taliban are definitely feeling like they would be in a position to carry out an offensive. On my last show, I talked about an article from antiwar.com by Jason Ditz, where he says that the Taliban now control over 50% of the territory of Afghanistan. And so, I mean, they're in a position now. I do feel like the U.S. with air power, it's not like we're going to have a situation where we're helicoptering people out of the Bagram Air Base as the Taliban lob rockets into it or something like that. But I do think the Afghan government and thereby U.S. forces could be pushed out of major population centers in the heavy Pashtun areas of Afghanistan, what would that be? Kandahar or Helmand, for people looking at a map, that these are the heavy Taliban areas down in the south and the west of the country. And so it's very, it's a very dangerous situation in Afghanistan, Joanne. And I find it interesting that, the push is coming from all sides in the U.S., from different hots, but Germany as well is saying, I have an article here from Reuters, that Germany warns against a swift withdrawal from Afghanistan. On the last show I talked about, they had actually planned to withdraw their troops in March. I guess that would have been along the lines of the agreement, of course, maybe believing Trump was going to withdraw the U.S. forces in May. They're getting out in March. But now that you got Biden, maybe they think he's not going to commit to the deal, or if they keep their troops there, it'll keep the U.S. from leaving. And so, this is one of the things, everybody's like, we need our allies. We need to be closer with our allies, good relations with allies. Well, this is a case where allies are drawing us into more war, where Americans are going to die for absolutely nothing.
I hear, and I mean, it's possible that NATO is just sort of taking the hit here, because Biden knows that this is going to be it should be a disastrous decision for him. Maybe they're trying to take some of the responsibility for keeping troops and increasing numbers of troops in the case of Iraq. And it would not surprise me at all if the same happened in Afghanistan. But I hear NATO demanding that we can't leave. So I don't quite know if the situation is the way it normally is, where, the U.S. calls all the shots in NATO here. There's something else going on. I also sense, and I don't have any inside information about what happened in the back rooms, but I get the sense that there's infighting within NATO over this. And maybe we'll hear more about that over time. I don't know. But just watch how nervous the guy is. And some of the journalists, I don't know if we're going to go through the whole thing, but there are some journalists who ask questions here, and they push back a little bit. There were a few softball, plugs in there, just not real journalists. But there were a couple, from the Middle East, who were asking real questions.
Yeah. All right. So let's continue to play the presser.
Today, we decided to expand NATO's training mission in Iraq to support the Iraqi forces as they fight terrorism and ensure that ISIS does not return. The size of our mission will increase from 500 personnel to around 4,000, and training activities will now include more Iraqi security institutions and areas beyond Baghdad. Our presence is conditions-based, and increases in troop numbers will be incremental. Our mission is at the request of the Iraqi government. It is carried out with full respect for Iraq's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
So, Joanne, there's a couple things there that I want to hit on.
Secretary General.
One of those being that he says the increase will be incremental based on conditions. So it kind of sounded to me like it wasn't necessarily going to be the last increase of NATO forces in Afghanistan. I was kind of surprised by this move, to be honest. I had no idea that there was really a thought of increasing NATO forces in Iraq. I'm not sure why there would be a need to increase the amount of NATO troops in Iraq, what the training is for. To the extent that the Islamic State exists in Iraq, I'm sure the foreign presence is part of what fuels it. And then I think another issue on top of all of that is the increase in the presence of the coalition troops may not only upset like the ISIS Sunni types, but is definitely going to upset the Shia militias. And now everything the Shia militias will do will be blamed on Iran, and they'll say they take orders from Iran, and it's probably somewhat true that they have a relationship with the Iranians, but for Iraqi nationalist reasons, I think they're going to be very interested in trying to push NATO troops out of the country, and if NATO's increasing, that means they're going to attack NATO forces more. And of course, I'm guessing that a disproportionate number of the NATO force and a lot of the lives put in danger by the NATO force will end up being American lives. And so that's a big concern for me. Joanne, I know you've interviewed Elijah quite a bit, and he makes it sound like the government is all on board with this, but from my memory of your interviews with Elijah Manier, that doesn't seem to actually be the case in Iraq.
Well, I mean, the entire Iraqi government's never on board with they're never aligned on pretty much anything, but enough of them did to get a vote through parliament. So that's saying something. But I don't know a lot about this newer prime minister. So I can't really speak on that.
Right.
Or, the defense forces in Iraq. He talked about the authorities. He didn't, well, I guess that should mean the government, but we know different. We know differently. Right.
One of the things that I picked up recently was that the U.S. actually was looking at, or the U.S. ambassador to the UN, said that the U.S. must combat or try to stop the influence of Iran in Iraq. And so that, I think, adds to what these troops are doing there, that this isn't just about trying to, train up against ISIS, but I think a lot of this has to do with trying to combat Iran, which is very interesting how many U.S. missions end up going from, being, we have to go after the terrorists, to then we have to go after the people who actually hate the terrorists. In this case, the Shia militias were assisting the U.S. During a portion of, the offensive against the Islamic State, where now we consider these forces to be some of the most evil in Iraq. So
and he's not just increasing numbers. He also says they're going to expand their territory. And I'll just mention another, and I will talk to Elijah again soon, I think, so we can get some more definitive answers. But something he wrote at the end of January was a question, are these defensive moves, or are these preparation for war with Iran, even before this announcement, when he talked about how the U.S. had decided to deploy the Israeli Iron Dome missile interceptor systems in Eastern European countries and also in the Gulf countries, and what that was all about. So, and they also took they as part of that deal that they made and that Israel and the Middle East made, they moved the Israeli military activities from EUCOM to CENTCOM, so I didn't think of that as a big thing, but he asked if it was a step toward a preemptive military strike on Iran. I find it hard to believe that Biden would do that, but I don't know. I think they're just very nervous about leaving those troops there. I think they know. I don't know. I shouldn't speak because I really don't understand what they're doing right now.
Right. Well, you brought up a pretty interesting point before the show, which is it seems like we're kind of rolling back to 2015 on foreign policy. When it comes to presidents, especially in libertarian circles, Joanne, it's kind of cliche to say the foreign policy really doesn't change. And in a sense, that's true. The U.S. foreign policy is militaristic no matter who's in charge. But it does change a little bit as far as what the priorities are. And so we've seen some things from Biden that aren't, bad. Like he's taken a less friendly approach towards Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has made some, they released female activists from jail. They commuted the sentence of some, minors that they were going to behead. They're very small steps. The U.S. is still going to be plenty friendly towards Saudi Arabia, but there is a little change. I feel like the same thing with Iraq and Afghanistan, where Trump didn't get us out of these wars, but it did seem like his goal and the pressure that he was applying was for the U.S. to leave. And now that we have Biden, that pressure is gone. And so without that pressure to kind of try to force the troop levels down, they're now inflating again. And so it's kind of like one of those things where the president puts different pressures, you're going to get somewhat different results. Obviously, the Bush, Obama, Clinton, whoever you want to name, they're war hawks, they're militarists, but they're militarists in different ways. So I think that's important. I mean,
Trump was, pushing out the message. Now it was an election season, of course, but about, bringing home troops for Christmas and things like that. And I think it's very telling that the first time NATO meets after Biden's in office, they kind of reset things. If one of that reset word keeps coming up again and again. And I can't help but remember when Trump quickly ordered the withdrawal of troops from Syria. I know I'm like a broken record on this, but I kept telling you, Kyle, like Lindsey Graham was out on every television channel. He's clearly all worked up and upset. And he's saying, he kept saying, we got to reset the table on this, reset the table. And I feel like that's exactly what is happening right now. They're resetting the table, as if the past 4 years didn't happen. And I think it would have been very difficult for them. I'm not sure how much real power a president even has anymore, but I think it would have been very difficult for them to do this with Trump in office. I think he was resisting it strongly. Because you can't, believe that these suggestions just came up. The pressure was on to do exactly these things for the past 4 years, and they're very cagey about doing it right now because it's very obvious that one president was trying to scale things down, and they are trying to scale things back up. They're reneging on a peace agreement. They're reneging on withdrawal agreements. All kinds of bad stuff.
Right.
And they don't look good at all.
So one thing you mentioned there was something that I'm hearing a lot, which is the idea that Donald Trump was like excluded our allies, that we need to repair the relationships with our allies. I have this article here from MSNBC titled "America After Trump Still Isn't Exactly Popular Around the World," and how Joe Biden has all this work to do to repair the American reputation. It's kind of crazy. That's something that I really remember from like my teenage years, Joanne, was that everybody was like, oh no, George Bush is ruining America's reputation around the world. But it didn't really seem to get repaired under Obama, other than that speech he gave in Cairo. I don't know what you could really do call of Obama's presidency to say repaired anything or was less war hawkish than the Bush administration. And then you had Trump, who of course was Trump, and now suddenly we're trying to go back to the time where we had a reputation in the world, and people are pretending like that's 2015 and not I don't know when. But that's pointed out in this article here a lot, is just how much Biden is trying to repair the relationships that Donald Trump broke. And there's a really nice article from Hunter DeRenis that was in Daniel DePentris, that was in the Washington Examiner, where he kind of went through and was like, look, yeah, Donald Trump was mean to Angela Merkel, but other than that, he demanded that the European countries pay 2% of their defense spending into NATO. But when they didn't meet that commitment, he didn't do anything. It was all just rhetoric. And now the Biden administration is going to, just be the same as the Trump administration, except without any of the rhetoric that says, European allies should pay more. In fact, for some reason, the Biden administration, everybody, in the U.S. foreign policy establishment, Joanne, seems to feel like we need to grovel at the feet of our allies to say, oh, please take us back after Trump was so mean to them.
Please let us pay for everything. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's new boss, same as the old boss, in many ways. This, I would say, is an exception to the rule, the Iraq and Afghanistan situation. So, but other than that, you know, Biden has not rushed back into the Iraq deal, and it really doesn't look like he's going to. Um, well, we'll talk more about some of the other regions too, where same old stuff.
Right.
But
Well,
this is a reset back to 2015 time period, and it's ISIS, 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 ISIS. I haven't heard a lot about ISIS in the last few years. This guy's all over it and protecting our countries from terrorist attacks.
right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think, kind of the thing they need in both countries. Because in Iraq, the complicated thing there is Iran. And Joe Biden, I think, kind of does want to get back within the Iran nuclear deal. Not that he's going to put a whole lot of effort into it, but I think there's a desire there. And so the excuse to escalate and staying in Iraq being the Iranian-backed forces is kind of problematic to that policy. And I think the contradiction is maybe too obvious on its face that everybody's like, oh, that kind of seems like a problem. Where in Afghanistan now, they need to connect the Taliban to Al Qaeda. And I just saw a report, I think from the UN, claiming that there's Al Qaeda, but not like the regular AQ. It's the faction from India, I guess, the people who oppose the occupation of Kashmir by the Indians. That those people, I guess, now have some safe haven in Afghanistan, or at least that's a claim, and so that's the reason we can't leave that country. And so, yeah, I think you're seeing a focus there. Also, my guess is that Joe Biden has kind of always been a surgical strike. We're going to just take out the terrorists with the limited force kind of guy. And so maybe these are the kind of policies that people know appeal to the president. And so there's more of a push that way. Go ahead, Joanne.
Well, I guess the question I have, and I'm going back to Iraq again, but one of the big differences between Trump and Biden was going to be that Biden was not going to do the maximum pressure campaign. Well, if you are quadrupling the number of troops in Iraq, how's that not a pressure campaign? How's that not a maximum pressure campaign? Yeah, so, and I am not sure I agree on how eager he is to get back into the Iran deal, but I don't know how he may personally, probably does personally want to get back into that, but he's in the same pickle that Obama was in. You can't please this coalition of allies. And Biden, he's the one who actually, in what was called a gaffe, he actually came right out and said that about Syria, saying, well, the problem here is our allies, about how they have different objectives and they're a real pain in the neck. And then he had to walk it back and issue an apology for that. But that was one of the rare times when he told the truth.
Yeah, no, that is a good point, especially when it comes to Iran, that it seems like some of the European allies, specifically France and Germany, are interested in saving the Iran nuclear deal and see economic benefits by, having ties to the Iranian economy, where other U.S. allies who often seem to have a lot, even sometimes more influence in the U.S. than the traditional NATO allies like Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. Maybe don't want war with Iran, but they definitely don't want U.S.-Iranian rapprochement and a normalization of U.S. and Iranian relations. Israel may want a little bit more conflict than the other two. I legitimately think the UAE and Saudi Arabia aren't interested in a shooting conflict with Iran, but they do want to make sure to maintain their status in the American empire, that Iran remains an enemy of the Americans and a key enemy of the Americans.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
while we're on the Middle East here, Joanne, I found this really interesting statement in this article, and I'll just read it real quick for you. On on the one hand, the Biden administration has drawn a sharp contrast to Trump on human rights, where Trump readily embraced dictators and authoritarians. Biden has readily already spent a good amount of time diplomatically yelling at them, whatever that means. Where Trump readily embraced dictators and authoritarians, Biden has spent a good amount of time. Oh, I don't know why that line repeated. He has given Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro the cold shoulder after the right-wing leader echoed Trump's election fraud claims. Biden's phone call with President Xi was a reminder that he isn't cool with Xi's assault on democracy in Hong Kong or China human rights abuses. So there's a lot of crazy stuff in here, Joanne. The first one, I guess, is the claim that Biden has drawn a sharp contrast to Trump on human rights. I mean, the examples they point to are Brazil and China, and in Brazil, he clearly, he even says it's because Bolsonaro supported Trump's election fraud claims. He doesn't care about human rights. And then
Right.
when it comes to the China situation, he says that Biden reminded Xi he wasn't cool with the assault on democracy in Hong Kong or China. Trump was extremely hawkish on China. It doesn't make any sense at all to claim that wasn't the case, and that Biden has been exceptionally hard on China compared to Trump or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it would have been worthwhile maybe to point out Saudi Arabia here. I'm trying to write the article for this guy. I point out Saudi Arabia, but what do you think of that?
I feel like it's Groundhog Day when one of the things we said the most during the Obama years is that our foreign policy, and we weren't the only ones, our foreign policy makes no sense. And we're back to that even more than we ever were.
Yeah.
I feel like it made a little more sense, even if I didn't agree with it under Trump. But the stuff they say, there's just so many. I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right. Well, then I'm also confused at why it's inherently a good thing, Joanne, that the U.S. is confronting China everywhere, including, that they've run freedom of navigation exercises now around the Spratly Islands and the Paracel Islands and also in the Taiwan Strait. He's, doubled and tripled down on the claim to the Japanese claim to the Senkaku Islands, some rots off the coast of China, saying that the U.S. mutual defense applies there. The South China Sea is in between the Philippines and Vietnam. It's not even like the Pacific Ocean, which we pretend is an American lake. This kind of has to be somewhere maybe that the U.S. can't claim the right to sail our aircraft carriers 24/7. And yet that's what's going on, and this was happening under Trump, where like in September, they're doing 70 military flights over this area in a single month. And now Biden picks right up with it. Doesn't even slow it down at all. They had 2 aircraft carriers in the region just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, this policy has like a life of its own, no matter what else is going on, and seems to be largely driven by the Navy. But yeah, I don't, whatever it is, whether a president doesn't have enough power to overcome certain things, I don't know, or whether the ship is just traveling in a certain direction, like the whole thing about transforming from an anti-insurgency, anti-terrorist military or force to a whatever word they use for it, near peer competitor force, because the war profiteers would really like that, because that's when you buy the really big expensive things. And the Navy, they see it as a big opportunity, I think. And when I say the Navy, I don't just mean the actual Navy. I mean all of the
The shipbuilders, the radar
Yeah.
builders, the missiles they put on the ships, the people that make the boots and the uniforms for the Navy, whoever makes the nuclear reactors that go in the what you call it, the aircraft carriers. I'm sure Lockheed Martin's very interested because the more aircraft carriers, the more F-35s, right? There's a huge amount. Also, all the admirals, right? The more aircraft carriers, the bigger fleets you have, the more
More flag
position.
officers.
That's
Yeah.
right. It works out
Well,
very well for everyone.
we should maybe mention too that the Navy has been pretty embarrassed over the last decade, I would say.
Right.
Like those really embarrassing collisions.
And that was
Uh,
in this region. That it's the kind of activity that we're doing right now that caused those, that ended up with American sailors being dead, including a whole bunch of innocent civilians as well.
yeah, I think there were some things that I don't think personally, I don't think it was just a training issue. I think there were some serious systems that needed to be straightened out and be less susceptible to um, like a cyber attack type thing.
Yeah. Well, I think another problem is that like the Navy and the military in general is really bad at tracking parts, and so they're kind of always like running behind and stuff like that, and people are overworked. And at least from my understanding, that was a big part of the problem in the Seventh Fleet around like 2017, when the ships were like running aground and running into each other, and they were operating in heavily trafficked area without their trackers on and stuff like that, and running into the civilian ships. And yeah, it was just it sounds like an absolute breakdown in command.
Yeah, I think it was more than just command, but I don't know. I just have a little tiny story. When I was in college, I did an internship, as an engineer, and so I got into a big defense contractor in this area who supplies the Navy. And it so happens I was in the logistics department, and so this is a long time ago. So we had these stacks, this thick stacks of reports, computer printed reports and they were all about the spare parts. That's what this department was doing, was like things with spare parts. And you wouldn't believe how complicated all that stuff is, and just how much stuff there is, and how it comes from all different places, and it has shelf lives, and
And I'm sure
um,
it's really expensive.
a crazy. But that
Yeah.
was back in the 80s. So that was, the I don't remember $5,000 toilet seats or whatever it was. Crazy stories, but
Right.
yeah, it is. It's a crazy hard thing to do. But like also like step back, bigger picture. There are lots of people saying that that aircraft carriers and large naval ships are obsolete. They're sitting ducks. In the age of missiles, they are just sitting ducks. Um, so the Navy is really there's all kinds of infighting right between the different branches about who should have planes and who should have the Army has ships and the Navy has planes and all that stuff. So but a lot of people are saying, why do we even have these giant ships anymore? So they have an existential threat that's been going on, and in addition to all the embarrassments. And I think I don't know why or how, but I think that has something to do with the whole South China Sea stuff.
Right. Well, it could be. I mean, if embarrassment after embarrassment for the Navy, and then you can't find a real good purpose. If, it turns out that, especially in the South China Sea, where China has, look, this has been the U.S. policy for a long time. This kind of gumbo diplomacy has been something that, has been inflicted on China for a while. And so they were going to build defenses to sink aircraft carriers. Now they have, so the aircraft carriers are kind of obsolete. I guess, they're probably not completely useless, but in an offensive attack against China, like to try to defend Hong Kong or Taiwan or the Spratly Islands for the Philippines or something like that, absolutely
In a
not
real
going to be
war,
useful.
in a real war, I mean, nobody's going to just sink them because they can right now. But in a real war, and if they are that vulnerable in a real war. Like, how can you even really do planning? How can you do your war gaming and all that? But anyway, we're getting a little bit off topic.
One of the things, going back to that article, Joanne, where we kind of have this theme: meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Was they say Biden isn't as nice to dictators, and I gave credit for the Saudi thing, and in Yemen too, talked about that on the show a little bit already. But particularly like the missile cells to Egypt. Al-Sisi, the ruler of Egypt, is probably one of the most abusive dictators that there is. I think in the last election, he rounded up like the 13 that's highest polling candidates or something like that, and actually arrested I think members of an activist family, like the day that these weapon sales were approved. Egypt gets $1.3 billion a year aid from the US, and none of that is planning on changing. So this claim that Biden is standing up to dictators is completely absurd. I guess a place where they were kind of saying that Biden was standing up to somebody was Netanyahu, who is Israel's prime minister. And it's kind of hard to call somebody who's like a democratically elected official that struggles so hard to maintain power like Netanyahu a dictator, but the Israeli government and the way they treat the Palestinians is like a dictator relationship. And so Biden finally spoke with Netanyahu on the phone. I think, again, kind of like Bolsonaro, the issue wasn't in the very least about the Palestinians. It was all about the close relationship that Netanyahu had with Trump and how Netanyahu signed the Abraham Accords leading up to the election, which, while we're just, kind of show certificates that did more to increase an arms race in the Middle East than bring peace anywhere, nonetheless was a PR victory for Trump. And, had Netanyahu not gone along with that, he probably would have gotten a phone call from Biden a hell of a lot earlier. And so he's not standing up to Netanyahu just because he didn't call him for a couple months. Israel is asking for more warplanes. They want to buy a whole fleet of F-35s and 4 KC-46 refueling planes. I think Lockheed Martin and Boeing would cash in big off of these deals. The U.S. is also planning to develop a new weapon system with Israel. This is going to be what they call a ballistic missile shield. They're going to call it the Arrow 4. The Israel already has the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3, and so it's a new missile defense system. And all these ties the U.S. is going to maintain with Israel, despite the fact that I have this article here from Maureen Claire Murphy at the Electric Intifada about how Israel is using the vaccines as a bargaining chip for the Palestinians. And now this isn't a case where Israel is saying that, look, if the Palestinians want Israel to donate them vaccines or something like that, they can't carry out rocket attacks or something, which even then would be pretty dark, but at least that's somewhat defensible. But in this case, they're looking for political concessions from the Palestinians, and the Palestinian Authority already has the vaccines. They just need Israeli approval to bring them into Gaza, which is an open air prison housing 2 million people that hasn't gotten a single vaccine so far.
I don't even know what to say about that. As far as the Biden-Netanyahu relationship, I'm going to wait and see on that. I'm not going to comment. I think this is a bit of theater of, waiting a really long time to speak to Netanyahu and all that. I don't believe that for 1 minute that this is the first time they talked, whether personally or through back channels, I don't know.
Right.
But, yeah, I don't believe it for a minute.
Yeah, and even if not, it's not like, Biden had made it clear that he won't leverage the aid to Israel already. It's not like the U.S. had any plans under Biden to do anything to put any pressure on Israel. He just didn't personally call, or at least a public call, to Netanyahu within 4 weeks of him taking office. Who really cares? You know what I mean? It's not like there was a fundamental risk or change in the U.S.-Israeli policy. And I'm sure all the backdoor communications that always go on were going on to make sure that, nothing faltered in the U.S.-Israeli relationship. And the relationship is so important to what happens in the Middle East. Again, it continues the oppression of the Palestinians, which is a major rallying cry of the jihadists who hate America most and who want to carry out attacks in the U.S. And they're a major antagonist towards Iran and are constantly ramping up the threat there. They provoke Hezbollah that way. They could say, oh, Iranian aggression on our border. They carry out airstrikes in Syria all the time. I've been reading they've been, since Biden took office, at least one or two airstrikes a week in the middle of the night on the city of Damascus. Imagine if that was the capital of the U.S., that was Washington, D.C., where every week there was, F-35 or something flying overhead, dropping airstrikes. Not that, these are killing a bunch of civilians, but the civilians have to be absolutely terrified.
Yeah. And, can we also just look at the logic of this? The Biden coalition was very clearly it went across the neoliberal to the neoconservative spectrum. Do you really think that Biden snubbed Netanyahu when some of the people in his coalition and his administration are some of the most pro-Israel neoconservatives? I don't buy it. It's I don't know exactly who the audience is, but it's theater.
So, Joanne, anything else on Biden's foreign policy? I know we had a couple other stories we wanted to get to, including what's going on at the Capitol.
Well, we did want to talk about Venezuela real quick.
That's right. I actually have an article here that was on the Ron Paul Institute website today, titled U.S. Sanctions on Venezuela Have Failed to Achieve Anything But Needless Death and Misery. Against all reason, they are set to stay. I don't know what else you have, but that's a pretty solid headline to describe what's going on with the U.S. Venezuela policy.
Yeah, I mean, Trump went apeshit on Venezuela, but the Bush administration, the Obama administration had been putting all kinds of pressure on them, just in a different way, a slow burn. Well, Bush tried a coup, so there's that. But Obama was the one who declared them, I don't know, some kind of threat to American national security that paved the way for ridiculous sanctions. He was putting the squeeze on, probably with special forces and things like that, because that was the way that the Obama administration liked to operate. The status of the special operations forces and the numbers of the special operations forces under Obama skyrocketed. And they, I don't even know what kind of a power struggle. I know there was a power struggle of sorts within the Pentagon and within the branches over that. So, but that's the kind of thing that you can keep covert. You don't have to say that, you have troops. So I don't know what was going on there. Trump was loud and boisterous about it and brought ridiculous people in to run the operation and did all kinds of crazy things, which I'm sure I don't even remember how much it was criticized by people like Biden. But, the tactics will change, but it doesn't sound like the policy is. Does it sound like that to you?
No, and in fact, I don't think the tactics are even changing at all. I think the sanctions are there to stay. They're going to continue to recognize Juan Guaido as what they call the rightful president of Venezuela, even though he doesn't hold any position in government anymore. In fact, I remember one time during the campaign, Joanne, where it seemed like the Trump administration wasn't going to say, okay, Maduro's the rightful leader of Venezuela, but was kind of walking away from Guaido at the very least. And Biden's Twitter account was out there reaffirming how much his administration would support Guaido and say, I think that if anything, this is going to be maybe a more aggressive campaign in Venezuela. I know that Biden had signaled after he was elected that he would be willing to talk with Venezuela as long as they agree to have free and fair elections. But free and fair elections is code for electing who the U.S. wants. That means it's not going to be Maduro or anybody who would be considered a successor to Chavez, right? So,
yeah, he just did the same thing with Myanmar, whatever that country is now called. if I were Biden, I would back off the free and fair election thing.
Yeah. And then I'll add the other trap I think Biden might fall into in Venezuela is the same one they seem to be falling to on Iran, which is these fools, Joanne, actually think that sanctions work. And so they think that even though it may not have been good that Donald Trump did these things, it has put them in an advantageous position. And so whenever you have the good humanitarian busybodies like Samantha Power in positions
Oh
of
my
power,
God.
don't you think that her goal is she's going to see the sanctions, she's going to see the leverage, and she's going to say, with this leverage, we're going to be able to, do this, that, and the other to, make Venezuela or Iran or North Korea a place where, women feel safe to walk around in bikinis and vote all day long, right?
Yeah, like
Whoever
they really
absurd
care about women. Yeah, they'll just come up with 10 new proxy forces to go in and make a total mess and then end up shooting at each other. But whatever.
Joanne, should we move
Oh,
on
let
to...
me just say one more thing
Yeah,
about
go ahead.
Juan Guaido. I read that some countries walked back their ridiculous recognition of him as the leader of Venezuela.
Yeah,
That
some
over
European
time they
countries
just walked
have.
it back. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that would be the way to go if you're Joe Biden, but I'm not hopeful. So I want to mention this going on at the Capitol, Joanne, because it's something that we've paid a lot of attention to. And I have an article here from The Hill where they're reporting that nearly 5,000 National Guards troops to stay in D.C. over concerns of potential violence in March. And Joanne, I am not even kidding you that the excuse for this, and my apologies for the million pop-ups here on this site. That's usually why I use the outline page for anybody who looks at the show, unless I know there's no pop-ups. I thought The Hill was okay, though. But according to this article, they say thousands of National Guard troops will remain in Washington, D.C. in early March amid concerns over followers of the far-right QAnon conspiracy theory, some of which hold out hope that Donald Trump will be returned to office on March 4th. I have not that I have a whole bunch of Q friends or anything like that, but I typically have the kind of friends that like have friends that are Q people and then they post memes mocking the Q people. I haven't heard of this March 4th thing at all. And yet this, very thin thread that God knows if they have any actual evidence of anything, is going to be their excuse to keep DC militarized. And I don't have the article up here, but Will Porter pointed out to me, Joanne, just before we went live here, that they're actually planning on keeping up the barbed wire fence for several months.
I have heard that they are trying to find reasons to keep the green zone until the fall.
Is there any reason to the
links.
fall? Or
I don't know. I just heard that, so I haven't confirmed it myself. But it just occurs to me that Q drops could be really important, really useful, couldn't they, for somebody who wanted to use them to keep troops around and to do big crazy things. Just,
absolutely. Yeah.
Just make a Q drop and then say, "Oh my God, this horde of millions of how many? I don't even know how many real Q believers, true believers there are." But yeah, it could be useful. But that's just the way my mind works.
Yeah. Well, and so many of these groups have so much, FBI and other federal police informants involved and embedded with them. And, the FBI tells the people, they're like, oh, hey, see if this person will be willing to carry out an attack. And so, that you could come up with all this, what they call chatter, saying that, oh, hey, we're plotting an attack and everything. But how much of it is just, the informants or the actual FBI agents, prompting and prodding people to do something violent when they never really will.
Yeah, like with Iraq, all the talk about ISIS, and the concern about, creating justifications for what they're doing right now. That really worries me because I'm just worried that there are going to be false flag things used that are going to be created to justify things that we want to do, like we saw happen over and over and over and over again in Syria.
Right. And I think they really want this domestic war on terror. I think they want a domestic war on terror bill. I think that's one of the big goals here, to get what they want to get out of this. And the way to do that, of course, is by, creating threats or, making situations seem worse. And certainly if you have the Capitol surrounded in barbed wire and you keep yelling, we only do it because the Trump Q people are nuts. We only do it because the Trump Q people are nuts. Then you assume the Trump Q people are nuts. You know what? Like it's kind of reverse of how the whole reasoning works there. Any other stuff on the Capitol, Joanne, or what's going on with the domestic war on terror here?
I'm almost tempted to drive down there to see what it looks like for myself, but I know, we can ask some people who live there. But do they still have the checkpoints coming into the city, which I'd heard about? Maybe that was just, I know it's been ramped down some, but like, do they still have that big wall and fence up and all that stuff?
I know the fence is still up. I'm not sure about like checkpoints coming into the city or where, civilians are allowed to be in this situation, especially because independent media, as we talked about, Joanne, is so important. And my guess is that it seems to me like there's some media going on in the Capitol, although it's been limited for a long time because of COVID. My guess is that there's no independent journalists getting in there, really. And so that really concerns me about,
with like the press passes and all that, right?
Right.
Yeah,
just more
the
so
White
than
House
normal.
pressers too, right? So, but I mean, Kyle, here's a question for you. What are they so worried about? Like, for real? They're clearly not worried about the March 4th and the Q and all that. Well, what are they why are they doing this?
To be fair, Joanne, I think some of the congressmen, and I won't say who, but I think some people in Congress probably are able to work themselves into a position where they actually believe some of this is true. And I'm sure that everybody around them reinforcing that narrative, and then the literal force, the, fence and the National Guards also kind of like create that psychologically. But I think a lot of it is show. And I mean, Biden's kind of a weak president. He's an old man. I talked about his recent speech with Will Porter on the show. It was pretty weak. It was 15 minutes. It wasn't astounding. Not that I'm the world's best speaker, but I'm also not president of the United States.
No, but he clearly, after about 10 minutes, starts really going down. I thought they could maybe around 20 would do it, but he can't even do the foreign policy speech. He was already floundering at the end.
I mean, the kids are still in cages. Black Lives Matter has gotten none of their demands met. People still don't have chats. COVID's not any better. And in fact, they have a major scandal on their hands now with whatever Cuomo, the hell is the governor there. That's all blown up in his face. And so my guess is that part of it too is that the more attention that could be paid to Trump, the less attention that gets paid to the Democratic Party, and the fact that they can't do anything to make anything better for anybody. All their solutions are more government, and at this point, more government means more corruption. There's really not. I don't personally see a solution that comes from reforming the U.S. government in any way that, either major party proposes. Everything's just more corruption.
Yeah, and I mean, again, Kyle and I make no secret about the fact that our political views are totally different on some things. But, we both, that doesn't stop us from being friends, from talking to each other, and both of us, believe in common ground. I do believe in having some social programs for severe needs, to just not let people just flounder and die when they hit a bump in the road. But when you have a super corrupt government, it makes it very hard for me to hold that argument and to hold that view.
Right.
So that is a major problem. And I think talking about common ground and corruption, I don't know, take a stab at what percentage of the people in this country do you think agree that the our system has been corrupted. Our government is, very corrupt. I think you could get into the 90 percentile with people agreeing on that.
Right, but then whatever percentage of them vote are going to go vote for their incumbent congressman.
Yeah, there's that.
And I'll just say, Joanne, not to get into a huge debate over welfare or anything like that, but one of my issues is I was just talking about on the last show is that the state of Missouri overpaid unemployment benefits to like 46,000 people to the tune of 150 million or something like that, and now they're demanding all that money back from people. And so I'm sure that a lot of these people are going to end up in worse financial situations going further in the future, where they're gonna have whatever benefits that they get severely limited when the government gives their money back. I've seen this happen to people where they're on welfare, but the government's taking like a quarter of their welfare check to go towards paying the welfare payments that the government overpaid them, and then the people are really just stuck.
I think there's way overemphasis on how the programs get abused by people. I'm 100% with you on them being abused at the top. My point wasn't necessarily abuse, but mismanagement but now they're
of
going to
the
end
programs.
up owing that money.
Right.
Yeah.
And just like I don't think the government, or at least not the U.S. government as it currently is, really could effectively distribute welfare to people. It's not set up to do that. It's set up to steal from those people.
And the banks are in on it too. You know that, right? With even with child support money, you get a card, and you can only make one or two withdrawals from the debit card a month, or you start getting charged big fees. So, they skim from every public program. There are just predator type people, and I'm sure the same is true with. I mean, people have in the supermarket have cards now for food stamps, right? You see that, and so I'm sure that every quote unquote entitlement program there are all kinds of third parties who are making money off of it.
Oh yeah, I mean the Obama phones, I know SafeLink cashed in big on that. But before we wrap here, Joanne, I just want to point out one thing that happened to me today that has me just a little bit heated. I was on Facebook this morning trying to share my news roundup that I post. It gets posted on the Libertarian Institute Facebook page, and then I share it from there onto mine. And when I hit the share button today, I got this that says, "This post mentions COVID-19. For more information and resources, go to the COVID-19 Center." It says, originally from the Libertarian Institute, registered less than 5 years ago, first shared February 2021. If you hit continue, then you could hit the share button and share it. No problem or anything like that. But this seems like really a way for Facebook to smear anybody and to suggest that the information I have in my post is incorrect. When you actually go into it, the only time I mention COVID-19 is to point out that a third of U.S. troops are resisting the COVID-19 vaccination. That's the article and the details from The Hill, which is a mainstream source. I was able to share this article on Facebook without any fact checking or anything like that. And really, I think what it's going to do is it's going to prevent people from sharing any of my posts, because it's so hard to get people to share things. I know the second I saw this, one of the things I thought was, man, if I had seen this on somebody else's post and I didn't really like the post, I wouldn't share it, because I would assume that Facebook would, hit me in the algorithms for that.
Yeah, I think it very likely to be, crappy algorithms, oversimplified algorithms. But I mean, I agree with you, and I'm a witness. I checked this out too to see if it happened for me, and it did. So I think it's across the board. But it's just, I mean, I've gone over the censorship so many times, and I actually forgot the point I was just about to make. But I think it could also just be, crappy algorithms as well. But just imagine how much stuff is going to get filtered. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Sometimes these things boomerang on them, right? So The Hill also was also hurt by that warning, right? Because somebody coming into you had an actual link to that Hill article. So they missed a click that they could have gotten.
Well, maybe
Certainly some. But the other thing is that one time I was searching in YouTube, and I think I was searching for either the Great Reset or Davos, right? And this big sort of warning came up on, on the YouTube searches, how they pop up. But the search results were all the World Economic Forum videos themselves. So they discouraged me from looking at the thing that they actually want me to look at. So they're just, trying to do things like this with software. It's going to backfire. I mean, and their software, their actual software, I think about what Twitter's and Facebook's code must look like by now. They have probably totally and completely wrecked their product.
Yeah.
I mean, their actual code.
No, that's very true. I guess the thing I'll point out, especially when it comes to my article, is while I did personalize it in the post and it feels personal because it's my work being suppressed, I think you're right. It's more of an algorithm thing that tripped up. However, I don't think the Hill would ever be tripped up in that algorithm. MSNBC, Fox will never, it's going to hurt independent media if every time an independent media post that mentions COVID is flagged, and you're not going to do that to CNN or the mainstream sources. Facebook has content they want you to share.
The bar is probably higher or a different level for certain people who don't have the sort of stamp of approval, because you can tell from what they say. We'd like to direct people to sources of authority, sources with authority. You don't have that badge. You don't have that pass. So you're going to go through a more scrutiny, I would say.
That's probably true. All right, Joanne, we should probably wrap there. We've been going on for a while, but as always, it was a pleasure to talk with you. AroundTheEmpire.com, right?
Right.
At Joanne Leone on Twitter.
That's right.
All right, and then conflicts of interest at con_interest on Twitter, at Kyle Anzalone _. There's a Facebook page, YouTube, library, Odyssey. Links are all on the show notes page. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll have to do one of these again soon, Joanne.
Will do. Good night, everybody. Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Kyle Anzalone. Follow Kyle on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _. Subscribe to the Conflicts of Interest podcast at the Libertarian Institute on YouTube, and you can find it now on other platforms as well. This podcast is independent media. Listener support's really important. Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire. PayPal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. You can find it on any mobile podcast app, on the website AroundTheEmpire.com. Patreon on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, share, subscribe. And we'll be on some new platforms very soon as well. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody.